Good morning. My name is Ryan Freeman. Welcome to my life and welcome to this channel. In today's episode of A European Adventure Story, I will talk about our London experience. My wife Yukiko was very excited to go to London. I was a little excited. I had never been there. We stayed at like a 2-star hotel somewhere in downtown London. Not exactly sure the name of the street. It was funny. It had, little British soldiers on the bed sheets. The bed was very comfortable. It was probably one of the best sleeps I've had on the entire trip was at that hotel. They had a free breakfast where we were all crammed in the basement. The serving women would come out and clean the plates and put down plates of food, and it was such a hustle, bustle, low budget but fun, quirky hotel, which just sort of reminded me that sometimes you have the best experiences not at 5-star hotels, because I've stayed at many different establishments. I've stayed at 5-star hotels and resorts, and I've stayed at budget hostels, and I've actually slept on the street. And what I find is it doesn't really matter necessarily how expensive or the ranking of the hotel. Those are indications of the level of comfort, but it's always the experience that you have. And we just loved it. And I was skeptical at first because we didn't have the best greeting there, but as we slept there 2 nights and had breakfast in the morning and just saw the interesting quirkiness of this place, I was quite happy that we stayed there. The city itself, if you've never been to London, it's a big metropolis. It has all of the main things that you would find at other metropolises, like Starbucks and a rapid transit system. Of course, it has the quintessential and the very iconic features of London, like the red phone booths and the double-decker buses and everything, the Big Ben and these famous cathedrals. And so I would say a big difference between walking around London and walking around, let's say, a city like Los Angeles is that the architecture is just a little more historical. Not even a little more historical, a lot more historical. In fact, that was probably one of the things that I really enjoyed about London. First of all, that even though it's a big city, if you're in the downtown and you don't mind walking, it's a treat to walk around because every street is interesting, especially from a West Coast Californian, because us people from California, we don't have a lot of history in our architecture. We do not have a lot of just beautiful, exquisite examples of how our ancestors used to build buildings. Everything's sort of modern and track style. And I find the architecture in California to be really boring, with a few exceptions. Even when I go to the East Coast in America, like New York or New England, then I find that to be, the buildings to be beautiful, even poor neighborhoods, simply because they have this history attached to them. Now, when you go to London, they have even more history than New England or the East Coast of America, and these buildings just, I'm not an expert in architecture, I'm not an expert in history, but I can appreciate the craftsmanship and the style. And London is a city where you can walk around. Of course, there's a lot of taxis, and you could even take perhaps a coach ride. We saw some, of course, London is a very touristy city. There's a lot of tourists there, so there are many things and places and services that cater to tourists. So you can find just about anything that you're looking for there. And we, of course, went and saw the sights and walked around the bridges and the waterways and went to some cafes, and we were staying near Buckingham Palace. That's where the hotel was. It was near Buckingham Palace, and just by coincidence, the first time we left the hotel after we checked in, we ended up running into, there was a procession at Buckingham Palace. I didn't see the Queen, but I did see their guards march and play some music, and there was a huge crowd that drew together. And as me and my wife were on a backpacking trip, and we're not rich, and we like to save our money, and that's actually my favorite way to travel. And like I said, I've traveled many different ways. And of course, I do like eating at buffets and famous restaurants. That's nice, but I really enjoy picnics. So we had a picnic near Buckingham Palace, actually at the park right next to it. And there was just a throng of people gathering. And then we heard the trumpets, and then we got to see a little procession. So it was really nice timing. We didn't plan it. I find, so this is just about travel in general, is that, of course, a lot of people like to make itineraries and plan everything out in great detail so they don't miss anything. I've always found that the most magic happens when you don't have an itinerary, you don't have a schedule. Somehow you're just sort of in the flow of things, and you happen to be at the right place at the right time. Or you're someplace that you would never have imagined. So that's sort of the way that I like to travel. And so I'm sort of introducing my style of travel to my wife. And of course, we have to make compromises because she does have a different style and different taste. She likes to go to the iconic touristy spots to take those photos. I'm not crazy about it, but I don't mind either. Yeah, we gotta take in some of the sights, see some of the churches, sample the food. There's lots of little festivals going on. I love the fashion in London. People are much better dressed in London than here in Southern California. There's a feeling of wealth. You can see wealthy business people, but there's also a relaxed feeling. And I found that the people I interacted with in London, they were nice and friendly, and had I love their accent. I can't say enough good things about London. The way the city is built, the attractions, the people, the ambiance. I really would like to go back to London. We only spent 2 days there. We arrived July 2nd, and we left July 4th. And in those 2 days, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, the highlights for me, starting with the first one, was the British Museum. The British Museum, if you ever are in London, I highly recommend that you set aside 1 or more days just for the British Museum, because first of all, it's free entrance. It's amazing. And second of all, it's got one of the best collections of ancient artifacts and relics from all over the world that I've ever seen. They have an Egyptian wing that has everything that you would want, including mummies and fragments with hieroglyphics. They have an Assyrian section that I was very taken with. This was the part of the museum that most impressed me. They had these reliefs, sort of carved pictures into stone that were thousands of years old, big, depicting how the Assyrian or the Assyrian kings, to be exact, lived. And there was this one, I believe it was made by Ashurbanipal. Forgive me if I mispronounce. My Assyrian is not too good. He was great king, and he liked to hunt lions. And I'm not saying that we should go hunt lions. I'm not a hunter or anything like that. But the view of this powerful warrior on a chariot with a spear plunging into a lion, And I know that sounds gruesome, and I know that sounds despicable, right? We don't want to plunge spears into lions, but actually it looked bad ass, man. I found there was something in the way these men of thousands of years lived that sort of attracted something within me, something within my blood, something within my DNA. And I think that's the powerful thing about going to a museum, because growing up in the 21st century, or the late 20th century and the 21st century, we're bombarded by our own modern culture and the values of how a man should be or how life should be. And, you know, we live just buying saran wrapped beef. We didn't kill that animal. We didn't build our house. We work for some company and some job that we hate, or just barely tolerate. We have our Netflix and we order our food, you know, from Grubhub, and we're spoiled with all of these modern conveniences, but we don't have this sort of beauty. There's beauty in the modern world, but we don't have this sort of just this stark manliness that our ancestors had. And so I found walking around the British Museum to sort of put me in touch with how man used to live and what life on this planet used to be. Bloody, violent, but also very powerfully real. Of course, that was how the king lived, and there were many people under him that suffered. So history is a mixed bag of glory and suffering. And yeah, I love the British Museum. If there was one thing I wish that I could do, is I would have extended the trip in London by a couple more days and spent more time at the museums. Because I always felt like my wife, she's not as into history as I am, so it was always sort of a tug of war. Now, this is one thing about traveling. If you travel alone, you can go at your own pace. I've done a lot of trips by myself, and of course you do get lonely traveling alone, but you are in full control. So if you want to spend the entire day at the museum, you can do that, or you want to spend the entire day in churches, or you want to spend the day sleeping and resting in the hotel. That's your choice. You don't have any sort of obligations to anyone else. Traveling with my wife, she has interests, I have interests. We need to balance them for us to have a harmonious time. So, but of course, then I have the joy of sharing this experience. So there's so many advantages and disadvantages to traveling alone, and traveling as a couple, or perhaps in a group, would be even more complicated, but also special in its own way. So that's just a little side note about that. I love the museum. Once again, I'm not condoning killing lions. I'm just saying that being in that Assyrian section with that beautiful stone relief of the lion hunt, Ashurbanipal, it did something to the masculinity in me, perhaps that is dormant, you know. I believe that, you know, we all got here from having men, you know, who were tough, and women who were tough, who knew how to brave the dangers of life, who lived on the edge, the razor's edge between life and death, with great, massive cave bears and cave lions in our prehistoric past, to rough bands of brigands and invading armies in the ancient past, to the horde, all of the darkness and violence and rawness and the feeling that our ancestors lived through to get us here to this sort of, you know, weird reality that we live in, where everything is sort of virtual, and even when we go hiking and camping, everything is controlled and manicured. You know, you can still find raw life, but it's getting harder as the years pass by. That's my take on the things. And so the second big highlight for me was meeting my good friend Richard Howe, aka Bear. And Richard Howe was a friend that I met in Southeast Asia in 2008, maybe it was 2008, 2007, 2008. I was traveling down Southeast Asia alone for 4 months, and I ended up meeting Richard Howe in Vietnam, in Ho Chi Minh City. Used to be called, I believe, Saigon. Forgive me, this is a long time. I'm going back in my memory. And he was this 22-year-old buff, looks like a rugby player, strong farm boy from Cornwall, who just had this spark of energy and this insatiable lust for tasting the country. And I was sitting alone at a table. He was sitting alone. We started talking. He met this Vietnamese girl. I won't go into all our details, but we ended up teaming up and having some adventures in Vietnam and Laos. That perhaps I'll talk about that story another time. So we had some history. He was a wildcat. We teamed up so long ago when I met him as a 22-year-old just graduating from Sheffield University with a degree in economics. And he was going to go take the London banking world by storm, which he did. But then there was the financial crash, and he rebuilt his career. And now he was working at a very rich and prominent, I believe, hedge fund group. I don't know. I'm not into economics, but he is, and he's good at it. And he works right in the opulent and vibrant part of London where all the money is changing hands, and he's built himself a nice position, so he's doing really well for himself. And he invites us to meet him at Green Park. I believe it was Green Park, right near his office. And we went into a market. He picked up all these beers and snacks to introduce to us, which were just delicious. If you go to, any country, of course you want to try not only their famous dishes, but also what do people just eat for snacks. And walking into their local liquor store, convenience store, they had these bags of like delicious sausages and bread, and I don't even remember them all. Maybe I'll have a picture or two, but they were just delicious, and different kinds of drinks. And in London, what you cannot do in LA is you can drink in public. So we went to the park, and there's a beautiful park. People have their shirts off, enjoying the sun, people drinking. It was just the best atmosphere. I mean, America is absolutely impoverished because of our strict Puritan laws about alcohol. And we probably have more problems with alcohol in America, even though we have this puritanical view that you cannot drink in public. I wonder if those two are correlated. But in London you can. And so drinking in the park, no one's acting a fool. Everyone's just enjoying themselves. I got to catch up with my friend Richard and share stories and fill in the gaps in our life. Oh, I should also mention that Richard did visit me in Tokyo when I lived there. I think back in like 2013, 2014. He came over, and we had a good time. We ended up wrestling in like a sumo ring at a sumo restaurant, but that's a story for another time. So I did see him one time. We kept in contact sparingly, and we talked about some of our trials and tribulations in our adulthood, but also some of our glories. And drinking and talking got to sort of rekindle that camaraderie or the reason that we are still friends. And so I find Richard just to be wonderful guy. One thing I did notice though is that all the years in a financial company in London, English people are a little bit more proper when it comes to manners and the way of doing things than Americans, in my experience. And so he was a bit stiff and a bit proper. He was just coming from work, and he's in his area, and it was such a contrast because the man I had met in Vietnam, who was nicknamed Bear, I mean, this was a wild guy. This was a wild man. I mean, one time he said, Ryan, we went to a bowling alley in Laos, like a really crazy bowling alley with some beautiful hot British girls, and he said, Ryan, I want to throw myself into the pins. And I said, well, but he said, I'm afraid. And we had this phrase, carpe diem, seize the day. If we wanted to do something but we were afraid, we just whispered that to the other person and then we had to do it. So I said, carpe diem, and he threw himself into the bowling pin. So this was the guy I remember. I'm not even going to tell you guys his stories because they were crazy, man. And I admired him for it. And he's a powerful man, strong vigor. But, we all change depending upon the jobs we take and the lifestyle and the people around us. And I can tell that he had transformed from this wild, ravaging bear who would just rake the countryside into a very proper man, And so what I enjoyed about our experience, and I think he would agree, is that as we started to drink and reminisce, and we had some other characters from our days to talk about, his animal fires got rekindled, as well as mine, and we started to really enjoy ourselves walking down memory lane. And he took me to a pub near my hotel, and we sat outside. He bought me some rounds of ale, which were room temperature, which was I prefer cold beer, but that's how they like it, and I'm sure if you're a connoisseur, there's a reason for that. But I like to do things the way the locals do, and so it was great to have room temperature beer, which I should say it was a hot evening. July 3rd, I believe, I met Richard. And then I went back to my hotel, had the best night's sleep. And then we were leaving London. So London was just a quick stop off with a couple highlights and lots of little sights and little tastes and little things like that. It was a wonderful time. I really want to go back to London. I loved seeing Richard. I loved going to the British Museum, and I loved my wife had a great time. She enjoyed seeing me with Richard. She enjoyed all the different bridges. I don't know if she enjoyed walking so much. I'm a walker, but we did a lot more walking on this trip, as you shall see. So this was just a short episode, and in the next episode, we will arrive on Madeira, and I will describe our time with Uncle Bob and how that played out. So my name is Ryan Freeman. Thank you for watching this. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you soon for episode 3.